Morning.
Good
Good
morning.
morning. Today is Sunday, July 11th. Um, Victoria is going to review the Tonglen practice, which she taught last week. Let us set our aspiration and motivation by saying the four immeasurable prayer. May all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all beings
They're
not be
never
separated
separated
from
from
the
the happiness
happiness that
which
has
is
never
never
known
known
suffering.
suffering.
May
May
they
they
rest in
rest in
equanimity,
equanimity,
free
free
from
from
attachment,
attachment.
anger, and aversion. Um, for those of you who have been practicing the Tonglen during the week since Victoria taught it, if you have questions, about the practice, or even comments are good too. How it's working, if it's not working, what your experiences were like. That's always good. That kind of feedback is really good. Both about meditation and about Tonglen or anything we do here. Feedback is good and welcome. So I'm going to read actually something that applies today from our teacher, Garchen Rinpoche. The mind of great love, when directed to the Buddhas, is called devotion. When directed to all sentient beings without exception, is called compassion. Drubwang Rinpoche, who is also from Rinpoche's tradition, Drikung Kagi tradition, he passed away a number of years ago, was a great Lama, Mahasiddha. Drubwang Rinpoche always raised his hand and said, "May all sentient beings benefit." And truly, there's no aspiration greater than this. It doesn't matter whether one calls oneself a Buddhist or not. The Dharma is love. When you see how your love touches others, it will become your happiness to give your happiness away. What is called blessings is nothing more but love. If you're self centered, your mind becomes narrow and hard like a block of ice. But when you let go and send out love to others, you will notice how your mind expands. The mind becomes open and spacious like a vast ocean or the sky. When you give rise to love for sentient beings, then we are exactly the same. Ultimately, self and other are just thoughts. When we see that we are not separate from others, we begin to fathom the preciousness of compassion, of bodhicitta. Love is the only cause of happiness. Its nature is all pervasive, like space. Love is the sunlight of the mind. That's a great one. Love is the sunlight of the mind. So how do we do this? How do we cultivate this? Uh, how do we send love? How do we connect to other beings, all sentient beings without exception, with the energy of love? Well, Tonglen is one method, and with that, let's hear from Victoria. We'll go over what we learned last week again, because it's I think it's an important practice, and it may take us a while to get familiar and comfortable with it.
So I hope that you have all had a chance to practice, and I hope that you have had some results in dissolving difficult places. I would like to start, and we're just going to do a very little review because I mean you've had the whole teaching last week. You know it's all about practice. Ultimately, it's all about practice. This is just a tiny little review. So I want to recite the opening prayer for our daily prayers in the Kagi tradition, and it is um, may all beings, my mothers, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to Buddhahood and liberation, may they have happiness, be free from suffering, and swiftly will I establish them in complete, unsurpassed, and perfect Buddhahood. So the prayer starts with those who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation. Why do we start with them? The entire, the cycle of prayer starts. That is the very first opening prayer. We direct our mind specifically to those who hate us, who create obstacles on our path to liberation and all knowingness, and those who, you know, enemies, and and those who create afflictive mind in our mind. We direct our mind to them because we need to dissolve the relationship which holds these people in this place. I mean, after all, it is our thought, it is our mind, it is our composite of who they are, the enemy composite. We hold them in our heart as that. And as long as our heart is filled with negative thoughts like this, there will never be any progress. It is almost, it's futility really to think that we can progress on the Buddhist path anywhere, while holding on to these kinds of negative thoughts. I mean, so in a way you can almost say like addressing or thinking or holding or trying to dissolve, this place of negativity, our enemy becomes the jewel, because that's the place where we get to turn our hatred into love. The dim mind of hatred and of burning into the mind of love and, and light, like in Rinpoche's quote. So in Buddhism, there are two blockages to liberation or Buddhahood, right? And what is Buddhahood? It's nothing but our fully ripened awareness. It is the ultimate nature of mind, right? It's also like in a little way, it's the mind that we connect to when we merge awareness with space. We have been already kind of practicing this kind of level of awareness. We've been connecting to it. Michael has been teaching you how to observing mind and letting the storylines go, connecting to the big, vast, spacious mind, not this tiny little mind of hatred and of negative emotions. So the two blockages are the obstacle to knowledge and the obstacle of afflictive emotions. Without those clearing away those two obscurations, there can never be, our awareness can never really ripen to its full state, its ultimate nature. In Buddhism, we refer to it as the Buddha mind, right? It's just a state of awareness. We all have the seed of it. That's why we can progress toward it, we can if we liberate these two obscurations, we can progress to our ultimate state of mind, but without liberating these two negative states without liberating these two blockages, we cannot really progress on the path in any way. The obstacle to knowledge deals with our understanding of emptiness. That pertains to the view, the ultimate nature of reality, where we understand that things are compounded, that things are impermanent, because anything that's compounded, which includes, all the objects in the world. It includes the world. It includes the notion of the self.
What does compounded mean?
Compounded means that it consists of pieces, right? Like a chair, for example. A chair is not some kind of a chairness that just appeared into our world. A chair is something that first was a thought, then somebody drew it out, then somebody went out and chopped the wood, then somebody, made the form, somebody glued it together, and now we're sitting on it, we're using it, we're referring it to as a chair. The same thing is the notion of the self. I am Victoria, I am, I live in United States, I have kids, that's also a compound, because, there's no such thing as the self. What is the self? I mean, is it my hair? Is it my eyes? Is it my age? Is it my, body? Is it all of this information that shifts from day to day? Am I the same person when I was 2 years old? Am I the same person that's, today? Am I the same person that I was an hour ago or yesterday? So it's compounds. We hold these compounds and we confuse them for something that's permanent and really exists. So that's the first obscuration. We have to remember that compound things always fall apart. They return to their, primordial state. And
which is what?
Which is emptiness. And another word for emptiness. So in Buddhism, the very kind of the preliminary understanding of emptiness is that things are void of self, and that things are impermanent, that things are compounded and they fall apart. So that's a preliminary understanding of emptiness, but it's also a very great and lofty understanding of emptiness, because that same same concept of emptiness also tells us that things are not static. So, for example, we can evolve. We can go from our 2-year-old mind to, our Buddha mind and everything in between. It also means that suffering can end and become happiness. Emptiness also implies a full potentiality of everything, right? It implies that, everything can transform and become something else. So That's the first. That's the first blockage. You know, the obscuration to knowledge, and the obscuration of afflictive emotions is obviously we all know what afflictive emotions are. Is when we hold on to these difficult places. You know, our hatred. You know, our anger, which can be subtle and could be just like being annoyed with someone, or it can ripen to hatred. Our desire could be just like we want to go out and have ice cream, and then it becomes attachment and becomes addiction, and it starts to destroy us. And everything, of course, comes from ignorance. So that's because we don't understand the nature of these things. We don't understand that we are not all these compounded things. This ignorance, when we do the last exhalation and we merge awareness with space and the 9th breath purification, make sure that you're exhaling this doubt, that you're exhaling this, this ignorance, and you're connecting to your Buddha nature. You're getting rid of everything. So, the obstacle of afflictions is the same as the concept of karma. We create karma based on ignorance and afflictive emotions. We are the recipients of karma and its force, and we also create it. We create it through our previous actions. As long as we have these two obstacles, we will remain in samsara, and we will remain in the grasping of suffering, right? We'll have like a good day and we'll fall in love with samsara, and the next day everything gets taken away from us and we're feeling suffering. One day we're healthy, the next day we get a sickness, and we suffer enormously. So, it's to understand that, the world of suffering, it's to understand that our world is driven by suffering and karma. So, when we think negative thoughts, we feel negative emotions, even if we feel like it's justified, it's a proper response, etc., etc. We are actually completely powerless, and we are in the grasp of these emotions. And rest assured that we are inflicting harm through thinking these negative emotions. And in Buddhism, inflicting harm and inflicting self-harm is exactly the same. It's not differentiated. The only thing that's important is the source, the cause, right? So affliction such as hate, whether it's directed toward someone or it's directed toward myself, it's unimportant. We are working only with getting rid of the affliction itself. We are working with getting rid of all the afflictions so that we can have a different life, so that we're not causing harm and we're not receiving harm as a result of our karma. That's all. We're not following the storyline. We're not saying to ourselves, oh, that guy's horrible, he did this to me. I realize a lot of people are dealing with extremely, extremely difficult situations. But the sooner that you put an end to the situation of hate internally, the sooner you can move away from this blockage, the sooner you can really move toward a life of happiness. Because when you're in the room with the person who has hate, it's like being in the room with the person who's on fire. So, we have a choice at that time. Do we stick our hand into the fire and we get burnt? Or do we like run and get a bucket of water and we try to extinguish that person? Because if we choose to, and it's really not a choice, being burnt and then feeling the burning feeling, and hating, then we can take that, we can get burnt from someone who's afflicted, and we ourselves start to burn. We go into a room and everything becomes, goes on flame. The drapes go on fire, the room goes on fire. That's what happens to us when we feel these afflictions. So it's very important to know that we have a choice. We can put the fire out, and that's what we're dealing with when we're dealing with Tonglen, when we are working with difficult people in our life. We are putting the fire out in them, we're putting the fire out in ourselves. And it's the only choice, because burning, sticking our hand into their fire, becoming also filled with hate, and then communicating that hate everywhere else we go, setting the world on fire, is not a choice. That's just like karma at its play. It's suffering, it's being the recipient of suffering, it's delivering suffering and sending it, you just keep burning the whole world, and from this internal fire. So the only choice is really to have the mind of love, like Rinpoche said. It's when we have the mind of love, it's like the mind of light. And so that's what Tonglen is for. That's the huge, vast part of Tonglen. We're extinguishing the fire in others, and we're extinguishing it. We start with extinguishing the fire in ourselves. Then when we're extinguished, when we don't have these afflictive emotions burning us and tormenting us, and directing all of our actions, because we're in pain, we're on fire, so of course we're running, we're feeling suffering. When we put out the fire inside ourselves, then we can help the other person. We can run and get a bucket of water, and we can extinguish their fire. And so that's what Tonglen is really about, and it's a huge benefit to ourselves, because we are extinguishing our own negative emotions, and then we're extinguishing the negative emotions in others. In Tonglen, we extinguish everything negative that we send toward others. We extinguish whatever they have. We're like bringing light and peace into the world, and it's a very beneficial practice for ourselves and for others. I mean, I guess it's very obvious how when we do Tonglen on those we love, it's very easy. We see someone in distress, and out of the heart of love, we want to do Tonglen for them. That's very easy. So when we do the 9 breath purification, let's move on to first, let's do 3 sets of Tonglen, like 3 sets of breath. Let's do first the Tonglen on those we love who are in need. Then let's do 3 breaths for neutral people, like your next door neighbor who is homeless or who is hungry, or someone in the subway. And then let's bring up on the third 3 breaths. So let's bring up a difficult person in our life. Maybe not the most difficult person. Start with someone maybe with whom you don't have such severe difficult emotions and difficult relations. But pick out someone, challenge yourself, pick out someone with whom you just want to end this difficult relationship, extinguish that fire of negativity, and then hopefully, through your practice, you'll extinguish all the fires, and you're no longer living with those feelings of any kind at all. I mean, there will come about a point when there will be no one that you can call an enemy, and no one that you will hate. The practice will bring about those results. No question about it. So let's start with the 9 purification breaths. We will expel through the white channel, we will expel our anger and hatred. Through the red channel, we will expel attachment, addiction, and desire. And then through our central channel, the blue channel, we will expel the doubt in our Buddha nature. We will expel the doubt regarding karma, and we will expel all the ignorance. And then we will move on to the 9 rounds of Tonglen practice. Vajra fist. And on the last 9 purification breath, we will expel all the ignorance. We will merge awareness with space, and then from that place, we will start the Tonglen practice.
Can you talk us through the actual technique
The technique,
of Tonglen? Yeah.
the technique, we visualize the person we love. We want to help someone, let's say, friend, relative, child that is going through difficult times. It could be illness or depression or just obstacles. We inhale all the dark energy. We bring it we activate our heart center. We inhale it into our heart center. We visualize this dark cloud coming into a small, dark sphere, which is our mind of selfishness. In an instant, the mind of selfishness turns into a white crystal, and we exhale the light and fill them with the light of completion, of Buddhahood, of purifying clear light. We give that to them. So that's the taking in the dark and expelling the light. It's the opposite of what we do in the 9 breaths, right? In the 9 breaths, we're inhaling the white, we're exhaling the dark. It's a practice we do for ourselves. Tonglen is a practice we do for others. We take their dark and we exhale the light and fill them with that light. So we will do 3 sets of 3 breaths, first on the person we love, then on the neutral person, and then we will do it on the difficult person, our jewel. I don't know if I mentioned it last time, but our teacher Garchen Rinpoche was in labor camp for 20 years, and he told us that he would do Tonglen as a constant practice for his guards, you know, basically people who tormented him and kept him hungry to the point of where, you know, he wanted to not even go on any longer. He said the starvation was so hard. But he told us that he did Tonglen constantly for them. He wanted to remove their causes of suffering, and he wanted to remove the causes of, you know, when they were inflicting, you know, horrible things on the prisoners, for example, not giving enough food, forcing them to, like, you know, horrendous labor things, you know, no rest and things like that. He said, I meditated to remove their causes of suffering. Namely, when people do bad things, they create negative karma. So you always also want to think about taking away the causes of all the harm. You know, you want to give them the causes of happiness, which is enlightenment, liberation, and you always want to think of causes of removing harm, so that it's not just like tomorrow you wake up and everything is reactivated. You want to take away the ignorance, you want to take away the afflictions that cause all these sufferings and the negativity.
So we'll look at some questions, and remember, feedback is not just questions, feedback is also welcome, so thanks. A few years ago I started suffering from anxiety and panic attacks. I've been trying to use meditation as part of my wellness routine, as well as traditional therapy and medical cannabis. Do you have any guidance on dealing with anxiety and panic attacks using meditation? You know, I mean, I'm glad that you are doing traditional therapy and whatever medicinal or pharmaceutical if necessary. You know, I came to meditation through the practice of Buddhism, not the other way around. I didn't go to meditation because I wanted to, you know, I had anxiety, I wanted to relax. So it's hard for me to separate those two things, you know, and in Buddhism, you're trying to, you know, you're trying to diminish the grip of the ego. You're trying to become a person that is more compassionate and kinder. I think if you're doing these other things, therapy, cannabis, whatever is helping you, that's good. I think meditation can probably help, but I think if you combine it with some kind of Dharma practice, it's going to help even more. So, do you have any to add there?
So Tonglen is also used for self-healing. Okay. In Buddhism, we never do practices only for ourselves, because it is considered that it's the mind of self-cherishing, also really not understanding our more vast and empty nature of awareness, you know, sky-like mind, is the cause of suffering. So the more self-cherishing, the more we kind of stay in the smaller, tighter space, the more suffering, you know, we will inflict and we will receive. But in Tonglen, there is, you know, the self-healing is also one very big practice. The way that you do self-healing is that you visualize, you connect to all those who are experiencing exactly the same thing, the same suffering that you are experiencing. You make your mind very vast and your intention very vast. By virtue of that, you are included in that group, right? And you are taking away, you inhale the dark of the anxiety, of the panic attacks, of all the suffering that you're experiencing, that they're experiencing, and then you transform it into light. So that's how self-healing is practiced.
And should you, if you're doing that technique, should you visualize specific people, or generally just imagine everyone who's experiencing a similar anxiety or panic attack?
You know, when we say visualize, it doesn't really necessarily means faces. Okay, if you can, it's always good, because you have kind of like, it's like mailing a letter to a friend. You know, you have some specific recipient. You know. But it's not necessary. It's not at all necessary, especially when you do the vast intention. You know, the more vast your intention, the greater the healing will always be. The results will always be greater the more vast your mind and your intention is. So You know, if your intention is tiny, the result will also be tiny. The greater the intention, the bigger the energy, and so of course the result is greater. You do not have to visualize people's faces. Just connect, just feel people. You know, it's like on the news, we know that, you know, in some country there's war and famine. We don't have to visualize every person to know that it's happening. We know that it's happening. Just connect on kind of a vast level. Feel everyone in your heart and know that you're doing this practice for all of the people.
Thank you so much, Victoria, for your explanation. This question follows on from a question raised last week regarding personal resilience and whether practicing Tonglen can cause one to feel more depleted. I'm an NHS, which I think is National Health Service worker, and like so many others, I'm feeling physically and emotionally exhausted by the effects of the last year, but I so much want to offer more to help others. Is it common to feel this way? I really want to develop this practice.
So, you know, as I said, we always start the practice of Tonglen by connecting to like our vast nature. You know, when we merge awareness with space, we are connecting to our Buddha nature. And as I said last week, our Buddha nature, even though we don't really have a direct experience of it right now. I mean, when we see our teachers, we see Buddhas. We know that that's possible, right? You know, little by little, the more we practice, of course, we do connect to this bigger, vast nature that is always has been with us, that will always be with us, and it can never be tarnished, it can never be broken, it can never really be harmed, because, you know, that's our Buddha nature is a one unchanging thing like space. You know, it's not like all these conglomerate things that come and go, you know, the compounded phenomena. So connect to your Buddha nature, and, you know that, you know, have trust that that's really your basis, and work from that basis. Don't work from this tired basis of the I am exhausted, this person am exhausted. Work from this bigger, more vast part of you. Same thing what you do with Michael, when, you know, you connect to your sky-like mind, and then you see thoughts, you know, as little clouds. You know, connect to the sky mind and your Buddha nature, and work from that space. You won't be tired if you connect to that element of yourself.
When choosing someone who's making things difficult to practice on, why do you suggest not making it an extreme case? When will I know I'm ready to use on extreme case?
Listen, if you can, and it doesn't, you know, bring about some kind of a trauma that you're reliving very, very intensely, if you can deal with that, ultimately you will have to resolve those places. I mean, those are the places that we must let go if there's any kind of progress is to be made. It's like letting go of cancer, right? We want to let go of cancer if we want to be healthy, you know. For example, you know, and you have to have the view, right? You have to understand why you're doing it. You know, you have to know that if you're living with affliction, you will only have a life of this afflicted person, you know, tormented by negative emotions, by feeling either fear from them or anxiety from them, reliving a traumatic experience. You know, you have to be like a surgeon. You have to take a knife and amputate a limb that's dead, because otherwise the rest of the body will die. But if you don't have the view, you feel like, oh, who is this person with the knife? They're just cutting somebody up. But if you have the view, you know, I am eliminating a cancer out of my system. I am removing a limb that's dead because I'm going to save the rest of myself, you know. Working with the view, you have to start to eliminate very difficult places. You have to know your own limits. You have to be extremely, extremely honest. If you're going to be re-traumatized, if your Tonglen is not strong enough, you're dealing with smaller, difficult people. When you're ready, when you know you're ready, you go to that place and you eliminate that obstacle. You know, you start to live without all this negativity. You know, you start to live with like your Buddha nature and your Buddha mind, when there are no enemies, when all enemies have disappeared, because you have no, the enemies will disappear because you will have no hate. The enemies are not gonna, you know, we create the enemy too. I mean, we make this, you know, construct, you know, here's a person, but it's because I think of that person with all these kinds of negative connotations. I create them as my enemy. At the same time, if that enemy gave you, gave you a life-saving kind of a donated an organ to you, you would transform them into your savior. So I always say, do it without the donation. Deal with negativity so that it's not a part of you.
Thank you so much for the clarification of the 9 breaths in Tonglen. Overall, after practicing over the past week, I'm beginning to feel less helpless in some of my close relationships and in the world generally.
That's the desired
yes,
result.
Good. When you said we often confuse things for being permanent, I found a very powerful reinforcement. Can you expand on this a little?
Yeah, because we attach ourselves to thoughts. We don't really, we don't notice how we create these thoughts.
Which thoughts?
Whatever. Let's say a thought of negativity. For example, you have kind of an initial experience. You see a flower. Your senses pick up on the flower. Your senses pick up the flower is red. It's fully blossomed, etc. Then, very very quickly, you say, oh, I hate that flower. Someone I hate gave me that flower, so I hate that flower. And suddenly, it's no longer just a red flower in the park. It's like a red flower in the park that you hate and you feel so very, very strongly about. So you have to understand this compounded nature, and ultimately the memory of you hate this flower and I got this from this person I hate, and the flower itself will perish. The conceptual component of it, the perceptual component of it, it'll all just go back to its kind of, to the state of nothingness. So, it's impermanent. Your thought is impermanent, your feeling is impermanent, your emotion is impermanent, as well as the thing itself is impermanent. So all of that, and that's the obscuration to knowledge. That's the first obscuration that I mentioned, of the 2 obscurations, the obscuration to knowledge, not understanding the real nature, the true nature of things, and the obscuration of afflictive emotions. That's not understanding that as long as we have afflictive emotions, we create and receive karma. So we cause and receive it.
Victoria has been able to reach past my justifications for holding on to anger towards someone I can't remove from my life, who causes me great pain and aggravation. By seeing this person as a jewel, I feel I can shift my relationship with them inside and out. Thank you immensely. Last week you brought great racking sobs from me. This week comes more pointed awareness and acceptance of the right path.
So good.
Thank you for explaining the difference between 9 breaths and Tonglen and how to apply each. Great guidance, Victoria. Thank you. Do we do self-healing exercise after we did the first 3 persons healing or before?
You can do that at any time. As I said, in Tonglen, we never do practice just for ourselves. In Buddhism, we never do practice just for ourselves. What we do for ourselves is maybe like do confession. When we do bad things, we say, I do them, so that you can actually pinpoint to the source of negativity, That's pretty much like the only time that we're really thinking of ourselves, when we're analyzing, about the sources of negativity. So you can do self-healing anytime because you're doing it with the intention of benefiting all beings in the same situation with a vast mind. Your intention is always vast, so the practice is always good. You could do it anytime.
Thanks so much for leading us through this. I had a question about anger and whether this can ever in the Buddhist tradition be seen as a productive emotion. I'm thinking about anger, for example, social injustice that can lead to positive change. I imagine the desire positive social change comes from a place of love, but just wondering about different conceptions of anger as an emotional drive. I addressed this in the past because people bring up, because we talk about the afflictions and negative emotions, we always bring up anger, and people say, well, what about righteous anger? And my view is that righteousness and anger are 2 different things, but sometimes they come together in reaction to, say you do see an injustice and it makes you angry. It's much more effective to just let go of the anger and act out of a sense of righteousness and respond to what is needed. Think in terms of someone like Martin Luther King Jr., who, the great civil rights activist who had plenty of reasons to be angry, and probably was at times or everything, but when you see him in action, in his activities, there's a very measured deliberate, effective way of approaching things, right? For example, when the Twin Towers were, when the planes crashed into the towers, before they fell, I had to run and get my daughter out of the school, which was 2 blocks away from there. And on my way there, all I kept thinking was, I was so angry at whoever did that, and thinking I wanted to join the army so I could kill those people. That's, I guess you could say, a feeling of righteous anger. And yet, that those two things together is not so much. The anger is just coloring everything, and my response in that moment would have been probably not a good one and not an effective one, and maybe that kind of anger led people to commit horrible attacks on people who didn't deserve it, or things like that. It's like when you're consumed by anger, they say your view is 90% distorted, because that heavy quality of the emotion just kind of overtakes any kind of rational thought. So going back to what I'm saying, I think anger is just anger, and righteousness is righteousness. Like I said, sometimes those two come in the same moment, but if we can separate them, and use our clarity of mind and act from a place of, where you want to effectively apply righteousness, I think it's much more effective, actually. What do you want to say about that?
I mean, I want to reiterate the same thing. So, when you're acting out of anger, you're always acting out of blindness, and you're acting out of a very selfish place. No matter how you cut it, you analyze it, you'll see that you're actually like feeling, you're attached to this feeling of, bad, hurting someone, doing something negative to them. And this is what we need to detach, because if we are going to perform any kind of meaningful action to benefit anyone, including protecting them, protecting someone's rights, giving them shelter, giving them refuge, giving them whatever they need, we need to act out of clarity, and we always need to act out of, a sane mind. So, anytime that you're acting out of negative emotion, you're always acting out of some insane mind, and you will cause negative karma, and you will be the recipient of negative karma, and it will determine what happens to you based on those seedlings. So it's never a good place to act. It's never a good place to do anything from. I mean, sometimes emotions arise. Look at them, know that they're yours. Don't let them spill out. It's like, don't set the world on fire. If a little fire woke up in you, or even a big fire, put it out with your mind, with your mindfulness. Don't ever set the world on fire. It's not really ever an action. It's just a reaction. So Buddhism gives us tools to act, not to react. Don't be this reactive, mess. Just come to some place of clarity. Understand that you have been set on fire by someone or something. Put it out before you act. Act, don't react.
Great. What role does Buddhism play in creating a harmonious and long-lasting relationship?
Everything. I mean, you have, with Buddhism, when you understand, when you have those two afflictions, those two obscurations, to knowledge and of afflictive emotions, when you kind of understand them, and you can use them as the basis for guiding your action all the time. First of all, the person you love is not just like a thing you're addicted to, like ice cream or food or something. You understand them, you give them the space, you love them properly. Your love never becomes or borders on anything that becomes afflictive and very addictive. And second of all, if they don't give you what you want, if for a moment, they do something, and anger arises in you, you dissolve the anger. You can always, if you have Buddhism, you know how to be with that person, give them the space, give them the love they need, not some kind of an afflictive version of it. So it's always good for relationships.
Once upon a time, I wrote letters to resolve conflict between loved ones. I now use Tonglen to send subconscious letters of love and peace, and I feel so much better because there's no expectations, no anxiety of a negative response, just a feeling of good karma.
Yeah, and also you're actually completing the action. You're not waiting for, someone to approve it and act with you on the other end. You are completing the action. You're changing yourself, and you're also creating a better version of them by ridding them physically of negativity. And you know what? You have to let go of any doubt that you are actually doing, you're performing a positive action, because wherever your mind goes, wherever your focus is, the energy is also there. Thoughts become manifest. There is no doubt of it.
I'm very thankful to be here. I've been struggling with a very emotionally abusive relationship and was full of anger because of that. I never thought I'd get away from the bonds of that relationship. The way you've explained and taught Tonglen has taught me so much that the only way out is love, and the only way to dissolve this bond and negativity is to send out love. It felt opposite of what I wanted to do at first. It's hard to send out love to someone who hurts you, but now I see it's the only way. Thank you so much. This has been a game changer in helping me to set healthy boundaries and heal.
You know, I'm really happy to hear that. Also remember, we don't have to stand right next to a person who's on fire, who's a negative afflicted person. We can do our practices, you know, in some distance away from them, as long as we ourselves don't become this burning person.
Thanks so much for this session. You briefly explained last time how we can do Tonglen on the fly, so to speak, while walking on the street, seeing someone in a difficult condition. Can you share again how best to do that?
Yeah. I mean, for example, you're going to the hospital to visit a friend. Don't forget that the moment you step into a hospital, it's filled with people, you know, in difficult situations. It's also filled with workers who are in a difficult situation, treating those people. Do Tonglen for you know, just the minute you step in, do Tonglen for everyone. Think of all the components which require it. Then focus on your person. You know, you're in the subway, you see a homeless person sleeping on the subway, you know, that's kind of the neutral person that I was mentioning before. Do Tonglen for them. Send them food with your visualization on the white light. Send them shelter, whatever they need, you know.
And neutral, you mean because you don't have an
you
emotional
don't really know them.
attachment.
You don't have an emotional attachment, exactly.
I mean, of course, it also means, you know, if you see somebody drowning and you know how to swim and can save them, you don't just do Tonglen. You're gonna get them out of the water first. We're not just saying, you know, to use that as a substitute for engaging in actions that, you know, that are beneficial. You know what I mean? That's not what we're doing, of course.
No, and Tonglen is really, you know, it's Tonglen. Think how important your life is. You know, if you're living the proper kind of life. Think how precious it is, how little time we have here. Tonglen means that with every breath, you could do something for someone all the time, non-stop, because as long as you're alive, you're always breathing. So you could use your breath to do beneficial things all the time. That's what our teachers do. We can do it too. We can engage in that practice. It's not a practice where we're just waiting to go sit down and sit on a cushion and do things like that. No, Tonglen is every breath. That means that every moment of our waking and sleeping existence, we can do, you know, some kind of a beneficial practice for others.
Thank you both. Tonglen's an amazing practice, easy and loving practice. I'm a changed person. Victoria, enjoy the metaphors and analogies you use. Thank you so much for expanding my awareness and learning. Following up on my anxiety question, this is the person who asked that first question today. For about a year now, I've been on a spiritual journey, soaking it in from different sources, including people like Ram Dass. This meeting with you today has hit me in such a way it feels like I found what I've been searching for. Thank you for that. Can you repeat the framework as beginners, where and who to focus on first, second, and last?
Yes. It's really always your choice. In a given session, you know, or just while you're walking or you're talking to someone, you know, you choose, you know, the recipient of your Tonglen practice, right? Tonglen is a practice of exchanging oneself for other. That means we take their suffering and we give them light. There is really, it's not like the 9-breath purification. Tonglen is at any time, whichever way it needs to be done. And you always determine that, you know. So if you're having a difficult conversation with a difficult person, you do Tonglen right there and then for the difficult person. You know, for the stubborn child, for someone who's mistreating you, you know, you do it on the spot. If you're together with a sick friend that you love, you do it for them. So you're doing it, you know, for those who you love. And then if you're walking around and you see a homeless person or you see two people having an argument and about to start, you know, hitting each other, you do Tonglen for them to dissolve, you know, to dissolve their difficulty. You determine the practice. You are the master of it. You decide where it goes, where it's basically in response to the need of whatever the moment arises. So it's a practice of response.
And as beginners, I mean, if you're talking about the technique, like first we did the breaths for people that we love, right? Say, my dad was in the hospital last week,
Right.
I was using him. Second was more neutral, maybe someone you don't know, like, you know, maybe a neighbor you saw who, you know, is walks with a lot of difficulty, you know, is injured or, you know, old or infirm or something like that. And third, people that we do have maybe stronger negative emotions for, someone who's done something wrong to you in the past, someone you've been holding resentment towards, things like that. In the beginning, you know, and we're talking about someone say somebody who was really, maybe someone who abused us when we were kids or as adults, that we really have some trauma connected to, was a perpetrator towards us. Those are a little more complicated. You know, you probably may have to address that in a therapeutic therapeutic environment with a therapist and things. That may take many years to get to a place where you can have some objectivity and stay away from it. You know, you have to decide that. That might not be something you want to do as a beginner. That's the separation and delineations we were making there. Related to the question about anger is the experience of resistance. What are your thoughts on experiencing resistance to wishing your enemies well?
Listen, we have been habituated to that particular reaction over countless lifetimes. So it is trying to undo our conditioning. We, as practitioners, we choose a different response because we also know that, you know, experiencing negativity toward anyone, including ourselves, we're creating karma. And karma is always negative. I mean, there is also positive karma or virtuous action, but you know, most of us we're always kind of swimming in the negative karma. We know that, you know, whenever we are afflicted by negative emotions, we have negative feelings, difficult feelings, feelings of resistance, not hate, but resistance, still trying to maintain status quo. We know that we are creating causes and conditions for negative karma. So we're trying to undo those kinds of places. That's what these practices are for. You know, what's the point? What's the reason maintaining these kinds of places? Do you want to just keep on, you know, living and re-experiencing suffering day and night? I mean, there's only one way to liberate yourself from that, and that's to not just, you know, keep the status quo. It's really to convert the negative feelings into positive feelings. I mean, the only way there is happiness in this world is when there are no negative feelings and there are feelings of love for others.
At the beginning of class, you said there are 3 people to start with. This relates, I think, to the Kagi refuge prayer. Those who hate me, those who put obstacles in my path, and I can't remember the last one. Can you repeat that prayer?
Obstructors who hate me, those who create obstacles on my path to liberations. Those who hate me, obstructors who create obstacles in my path.
Was there a third one?
And those who harm me. Those who hate me, those who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation. Meaning, anyone who elicits negativity in us. That's what it means, you know, creating obstacles to liberation. Anyone who sparks in us this, you know, response of negativity and sets us on fire. So those 3, and we're really not distinguishing them as 3 persons. Those are just the circumstances, the conditions, the karmic conditions, which make us fall away from our path and, you know, go into this wheel of samsara, of suffering. That's all it means.
I'm really grateful for these classes. Each week feels like a steady walk closer to a summit. However, the real joy comes in feeling that there is no summit, only continuous growth, very enriching and comforting. You know, in Mahayana Buddhism, there's something called the Bodhisattva Vow, which is, you know, what we practice. You know, there's big component is Mahayana Buddhism. Bodhisattva Vow, basically you're committing to coming back lifetime after lifetime until all beings, all sentient beings, not just people, all sentient beings reach enlightenment. That would be the summit, probably. This is very helpful. Thank you. Can you recommend some books for beginners in Tonglen? Also, how do you manage? Does Pema Chodron have a book on Tonglen?
I'll research specifically, what book it relates to Tonglen. But Pema Chodron has a lot of, she does tremendous amount of teachings on Tonglen.
Yeah, she does, and
she's a great teacher for beginners.
you can. That's Violet who's in touch, so you can remind me, send me a message and remind me to get you the name of that book. Also, how do you manage taking on other people's pain if one is very sensitive and empathetic?
Well, especially if you're sensitive and empathetic, that means you're so aware of their pain. To be aware of someone's pain is necessarily want to alleviate it, right? If like you see a person on fire, do you just want to stand and watch them like a thing of curiosity, or do you want to put out their fire and relieve their pain? So if sensitivity implies to me that you want to help them. That's what sensitivity really is. We're sensitive to their pain, so we want to alleviate their pain and suffering. And as I said before, and I'll reiterate it all the time, we have Buddha nature. Nothing will harm us. We have been here countless lifetimes. Nothing will harm us. Our negative thoughts will harm us. Our inability to sever our negativity toward others will harm us, as it always has been. We are here as a karmic result of having negative emotions, not understanding the nature of reality. So if we are working to change that, we are practicing Tonglen, we are doing other kinds of practices, we are observing our mind. We've made a decision, we want to put an end to negativity. It's the only game changer. There is no other way. So if you're sensitive, it's a wonderful quality. Use it toward benefiting others. We don't need to say I'm sensitive and enjoy it. We need to say I'm sensitive and I want to do something. So that's why we do practices.
I'm suffering illness and lots of difficulties. I have a tendency to feel envious of my friends having great times. I don't want to feel that way, and practice helps me overcome it. But can I do anything else?
Just keep practicing. I mean, that's it. Sometimes our karmic imprints are very, very strong. We all suffer from the same thing that you do. If somebody tells you that they're just not being honest with you or with themselves, we can hide things from others and we can also hide them from ourselves. Keep practicing. Just keep practicing. So if you want to really diminish this feeling of being envious or something like that, inhale the envy of all the beings and exhale it. Do it like if you're doing a practice for cancer or some other mode of illness, because it's exactly the same.
Thank you so much for doing this. I work in healthcare, and this year has been very difficult and exhausting, especially when you hear negativity and criticism towards healthcare workers, which I don't know why anyone would be negative or critical, because healthcare workers are amazing. I've totally distanced myself from friends who displayed this type of behavior, which is good. We always say boundaries are good and necessary and very helpful. I don't know if I should practice compassion for these friends to understand where they're coming from, or just cut off ties because I can't be around their toxic mindset. Cutting off ties sometimes is very necessary when someone's toxic. I mean, if it might be a little difficult if it's family, if it's your kids and you're raising, or somebody who's really, you're responsible some way to be in their life. You don't really practice compassion to understand where people are coming from. If they are negative and critical towards healthcare workers, they're coming from some very, afflicted place of whatever, of ignorance and jealousy or anger or something. So you don't need to know where they're coming from. It's more, you're practicing compassion so you're not caught up in that hate. So you're liberating your own mind stream and negative emotions and afflictions. And we're coming from the view of interdependence, interconnectedness, and emptiness, which is non-duality ultimately. So if you're freeing yourself, it has a absolute connection and direct effect on everything. Like we talk about, a drop of water that's added to the ocean becomes the ocean, So keep the focus on you in a way, even though you're practicing on someone else. If you're practicing Tonglen, or the focus is on them, but you're not focusing on trying to understand them or trying to educate them or trying to
and follow the story. We're not
and following the
stories.
story. That's a good
We
point.
are only looking at the origin. We are looking at our afflictive emotions. We're transforming them.
Could you provide this prayer to us to screenshot for further use?
Sure.
We'll do that next week. I am in addiction recovery and starting to include meditation in recovery. How can I use Tonglen to release the obsession, resentments, and fear I hold?
Just as in the previous answer, think of all those, separate all those emotions, do little bit of Tonglen for each one of them separately so that you get to know the specific quality and the place of that negative emotion. Break it down, analyze it. Inhale that particular emotion as a dark for all those who are feeling it. Start with addiction, start with, how easily, something that we like a little bit becomes an addiction. That has to do with, with desire. Desire, it takes almost nothing for a desire to become addiction. Think, do Tonglen on all those who have addiction, then do Tonglen for the other emotions that you're dealing with that you want to rid yourself of. Do it almost thinking that it's an illness. You're ridding all others and you're included in that Tonglen yourself.
So you can do it for all addicts.
Of course.
If you want everyone who's suffering from any kind of addiction, you want to do Tonglen for them.
Of course. That's the practice of self-healing. So self-healing is the vast mind of benefiting all those who have that illness, who have that issue. Mental and physical in Buddhism it's not a big distinction. It's the same thing.
Struggling to understand Buddha nature as I'm more neutrally spiritual as opposed to attached to Buddhism as an idea. Well, I think Buddha nature is neutrally spiritual, actually. I do mindfulness as a daily practice, which is awareness. I desire to reach enlightenment without a specific format of a figure like Buddha or God. Does that make sense? We're not relating to Buddha as a God. We're not relating to Buddha as some omniscient being. And you're talking, remember, I've said this before, Garchen Rinpoche, when we spoke about doing this class, he said, focus on the mind and remember that Buddha is not the name of a man, nor is it the name of a God. It's the name of mind. So Buddha nature is your mind. That's neutrally spiritual because everybody has a mind. So you have to think of Buddha nature as thinking of your mind. That's what we're talking about. So you're saying, I believe in good intentions. Can I practice Tonglen without being a Buddhist? You can definitely practice Tonglen without being a Buddhist. But know that your mind, the nature of your mind, is already enlightened. So you say you want to reach enlightenment. The nature of your mind, that Buddha nature that's inherent within us, is already enlightened. What we are doing is removing the obstacles and obscurations. It's almost like we have this gem that's covered in mud. And there's nothing you can do to that gem. It's not, nothing is going to destroy it, nothing's going to change it. We just have to clean the dirt off it. And that's what what practice is. Do you want to add anything to that?
No, that's it. I mean, if you don't like Buddha mind, we refer to Buddha mind just because, we're practitioners. But Buddha mind means ultimate nature of mind. It's nothing other than that. Our ultimate nature of mind is this mind of enlightenment. And when we speak about the historical Buddha, it's someone like us who started on the path and attained the final state of Buddhahood. There have been countless Buddhas. There's not like a Buddha, a one Buddha, countless Buddhas, and we are all Buddhas in potentiality because we all have Buddha nature. So we undertake the path and we use the skillful means of the path to attain that same very state. I mean, that's really the intention, right? I mean, we're on the road to get somewhere. That's where that's where the path is taking us.
Thank you both for these teachings. I love your method of presenting and sharing these practices. Victoria, your metaphors and visualizations are powerful and really help me absorb the purpose of the practice. Last one. Thank you so much for this practice. I have to go to the hospital next week for the results of serious medical tests, and I'm very anxious. Now I will practice Tonglen for everyone in the hospital when I'm in the waiting room.
And
Great.
may all your results, may there be nothing, no obstacles to your health. May everything turn out great for you.
Okay, let's close by dedicating merit from today's class for the benefit of all beings. Thank you, Victoria. Thank you all for coming, and thank you, Nick Solidio, our producer, for his kindness and generosity. Without Nick, there would not be this class. By this merit, may all beings attain the state of enlightenment and conquer the enemies of faults and delusions. May they be liberated be liberated from this ocean of samsara and its pounding waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. See you next week.
Take care.